Hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you are. Welcome to the Shift, Elevate on Purpose. If you happen to have been coming across this live and you are not already familiar with myself, this channel, or anything, I just want to give you a brief introduction to who I am. So, my name is Anthea Armar. I'm the founder of Armar Group. And mostly we work with entrepreneurs and small business owners to help them to tap into their purpose, clear out all of the limiting beliefs and barriers that they have placed in front of them in order to achieve their next level of success. And one of the ways of doing that is to use this program, the SHiFT, to actually help people create a shift in their life, thinking about mental health, mindset, finances, toxic relationships, and so much more. And pretty much the life that you dream of is only a mindset shift away. So I am super excited to be here today and to have this Q&A. And I have an extremely special guest with me. And I know that I will not be able to do her any justice. So I'm going to allow you to introduce yourself. So over to you.
Hey everybody, thank you, Anthea. I'm so excited to be here today talking about toxic relationships. My name is Tracy Borreson and I am all about authenticity. So when it comes to toxic relationships, you can probably imagine maybe there's not that much authenticity that comes into play because we're thinking about this and we're thinking about that, and all of these other things are speaking really loudly. And as a personal branding coach, for me, I am all about helping people hear their own voice, trust their own voice, and use their own voice. And that is a critical component let's just talk about managing relationships. We're going to answer some questions specifically about toxic relationships, but at the end of the day, our job is to create productive, trustworthy relationships. So that's where we're going to get to by the end of the conversation today.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And I'm really excited for this conversation. And just because, sharing with you, it just feels like at this particular time, and I don't know if it's just the pandemic, right? It's just that whole thing of, I want to do more, and getting to that stage where you want to do more in your life, then looking at the people who are around you and realizing that they're not fully supportive. And then how do you manage that? Because you're trying to go over here and they're trying to keep you down here. And so it can get a bit tricky. So I'm really excited for this conversation to figure out, how can we, so on Saturday, what I shared was how we can identify the signs of toxic relationships. So it's looking at, people who are manipulating you, making you feel guilty about certain things, discouraging you from doing things that are kind of bigger than where you are, and similar things like that. So it's kind of like once you get to that point in time where you realize that, potentially someone is toxic, how do you actually then start growing, right? And one of the things that I'd really love to kind of kick off this session with is a few questions that were asked at the weekend that I know that everybody will benefit from. So wherever you are watching from, thank you for joining us and welcome. But do drop any questions or comments that you have in the chat, and we'll definitely get to those today. So the first question that I wanted to kind of kick off with is, and I definitely get this one a lot, how do I know if I'm actually the toxic part of the relationship without realizing it?
We could probably talk for an entire hour just about this one, but we're going to try not to. We're going to try and keep it, as simple as we can. So here's the thing about relationships. They're always a two-way street. So there's always, to some degree, you're contributing. If you feel like you're in a toxic relationship, there's some way you're contributing to that toxicity. It may not be like some of the things, Anthea, you mentioned, manipulation, guilt, and things like that. It might be because you're not using your voice, you're not standing up. People don't know where you stand, right? There's so much assumption that happens when we have a lack of communication. And often we have a lack of communication because we're afraid. And sometimes we don't always extrapolate that to see, like, what is our fear? What is our fear of being judged? Our fear of feeling guilty? How is our fear contributing to the toxicity in this relationship? And one of the things I'll just, like, from a very simple business perspective, one of the examples I always think of is that when I was working my corporate work environment, I was constantly frustrated because I thought everyone else wasn't as accountable as me. Right? We were given deadlines. Everyone else would miss a deadline. I would have my stuff submitted. And like, seriously, we had weekly management meetings. Our KPIs were supposed to be in by Monday, end of day. And I was the only person ever who had them submitted on time. And it was so frustrating for me. So like, I felt like this relationship is not supporting me, right? Like these people don't care about accountability to the same level I do. And it was always hard on the relationship. Something that I now see in retrospect is that I still to this day, because I never asked them, I don't actually know what their definition of accountability is. And I never asked my boss if that was actually like, if your expectation wasn't that we got these submitted the day before, but we got them submitted the minute before the meeting starts, then why wouldn't you just say that? I never had that conversation with her because I was afraid. I was afraid to have that conversation. So partially that is on me. So I think when we use words like I'm the toxic one, like no, there's no one person who just like is actually poison. It's how you're showing up together that's toxic. And if you weren't showing up together, it wouldn't necessarily be toxic. So it's like a chemical combination between two people that's not working out. And so sometimes people, you can take this information one of two ways. You would say like, oh man, every time my relationships suck, I'm partially responsible. And you can feel guilty and you can feel disempowered and you can feel angry at yourself and you can go that direction. Or you can take this new information and be empowered to do something different. Because if before today you didn't think that you contributed at all to a toxic relationship, then you had no accountability. You had no desire to make any changes because you didn't know that you could, that was all that person and only that person has control of it. But every single two-way relationship has two-way control. I'm seeing somebody through my filter. They're seeing me through their filter. If we don't discuss what our filters are like, we never can adjust the filter. And so now you can go into, if you're dealing with a toxic relationship right now, just look at it from that perspective of like, if I was contributing to this, how would I be negatively contributing? Is it because I'm not listening? Is it because I'm too afraid to speak up? Is it like, and just explore, right? And one of the things I'm going to touch on a ton in this conversation is being able to find the places where you can explore this. Talking it out. This is why the coaching industry is so huge right now, you guys. Coaches are a safe space for you to talk about these things, right? They're impartial third parties who are there to support you. They're not there to judge you, right? It's kind of a perfect setup. Now, if you're looking at a work environment or you're looking at a relationship, bringing that immediately to those parties is another thing that's intimidating, scary, frightening, right? So being able to have a place, whether that's a friend, a parent, a sibling, if it's a work environment, maybe your spouse, right? Like I have a community, I like to call my people peeps. So I have a community called Your Business Peeps, which is just for people to explore these types of things before they have to take them to the table that matters. And so it's really important for you to find a spot where you can just start to explore this, because you don't know to what degree you're responsible today, right? You're definitely contributing in some way to a toxic relationship or not contributing to make it better. But that's scary to explore. And in your own head, you don't want to go there, right? Our brains want to protect us. And so when we're trying to explore things that make us feel bad or irresponsible or those things, we don't like to explore it. It's uncomfortable. And again, that's why having like coaches' jobs are to push you into that zone, right? Ooh, I see that. Let's go there, because you won't go there by yourself. But being surrounded by people, at least one person, and ideally a community of people that can help you explore those things without feeling guilty and remember all the good, amazing things about you, and that now you're empowered with this new piece of knowledge and you can go do something different. That is a huge support system in being able to work with toxic relationships, because I would guess for most people that not every single relationship in your life is toxic.
We'd hope not.
And also, if every single relationship in your life is toxic, then what's the common denominator? Probably you. And so it's just, and that's what I mean. This is, I like, you've heard me say it a lot, explore, right? I love to use the word explore because we don't know right now. It's like showing up to a new country and you don't have a map and you just get to follow your instincts and just kind of explore, right? If you were going to do that, there's no, maybe there's a little bit of fear. I like to go mostly to places where they speak English in case I get lost. But there's no end goal. There's no end game. So when I explore, the whole concept is just to explore. It's not to get to a specific point. And when we're in business or in a relationship, sometimes we have these specific points that we're trying to get to. And an exploration of this nature is not one of those. Separate type of thing. So again, I could probably talk about this topic for the entire time, but I'd love to hear your perspective as well, Anthea.
Yeah, I mean, that was so interesting. There's a few things that I kind of picked up, and I think, you know, the most important aspect was the responsibility part, and I think that generally tends to happen when there is an imbalance of self-awareness. You know, and so when we talk about I'm trying to now do something different with my life, so therefore I'm probably exposing myself to a lot of different things that I didn't before. And one of those things, whether it's from a coaching perspective or not, self-awareness is so key, right? And so if you're going through this phase of self-awareness, then you're starting to look at yourself and analyze yourself and see where you potentially can take accountability so that you can maybe take steps to make changes. However, the people that you're in those relationships with aren't doing the same thing. So now you're potentially taking on the burden of trying to change a relationship that is two-way, but only one person wants to change it. And so you could go from being toxic to, or contributing to the toxicity, to then causing another problem, which is to change a relationship that two people haven't agreed that they want to change. So it's kind of like, hold on, this feels weird. You're doing all of these different things, and I feel like I've not been consulted. So it, you know, so that I think was a really good point in the sense of, you know, how do you navigate through these things? And like one of the things that you mentioned is coaching and that safe space, because as much as we, you know, to a degree, the people we coach, they are strangers, and it's such an odd thing when you kind of get into this space. You're telling strangers about your life, right? But they are going to give you exactly what you need to help figure things out, because they don't have a history to judge you on, right? And so having that space and having, you know, your business peeps, the communities, the friends that you may not have looked at in the same way previously, but, you know, could be quite well trusted to support you during this kind of transitional phase. You're now in a position to start exploring, like you say, well, what am I doing here? And is this the right place for me? And if not, where else can I go? Right? Because you don't have to stay in a relationship. And I think that's part of the challenge, is this feeling that we, you know, to a degree owe people, because I've known them 20 years. So how can I now leave the relationship when they've just been so good to me all of these times, which, you know, that's not really an indicator for why you should stay if it's no longer working. So really, really interesting response to that. It is a case of how am I contributing to the toxicity or not, right? Or not. Yeah.
Well, this is the thing, right? Like every single relationship has different dynamics too, right? So when I say toxic, like I have been divorced, I consider that my most toxic relationship. different people have toxic work relationships with, I was watching a TV show the other day, and a manager was just like scolding this employee, and my husband was like, who would do that? And I'm like, well, we would hope in real life no one would do that, but I'm sure there's lots of people who do, right? So some people are dealing with things like that. Some people are dealing with parental estrangements, right? Like there's different levels of toxicity in different arenas of your life, and there's no like one answer to like, here's the magic powder you can just throw in a person's face and fix all the toxicity, right? Like this is not a thing. It's both of us working together. And sometimes, because Anthea, you mentioned like one person kind of taking the lead in like, maybe that is in personal development, or maybe it's in starting conversations or those types of things. And another really important piece to remember when it comes to relationships is no two people are on the exact same part of the exact same path. It's just is not a thing. And even if like, I see this a lot, mostly in spousal relationships, right? When people who are become entrepreneurs for the first time and they feel like they're not supported in that, or I mean, like there's lots of scenarios in the spousal arrangement, but you're not supposed to be at the same part of the path. And some days you're going to be the one that is pulling the wagon, and some days they're going to be the one that's pulling the wagon. And that's the same in any relationship, right? And I have that same thing with my sisters, right? Like sometimes in our communication, I'm the one pulling the wagon and being like, hello, are you there? Don't you want to talk to me anymore? And then sometimes they're like, hello, where are you? Like, let's talk, right? Like everybody has so many different contributing factors. And when it comes to relationships, we get really like tunnel vision on like, you should just be concerned about just me right now because I'm concerned about just you. Well, that's just not a thing. Right. But we assume it is because that's how we're focused right now. But that's not how someone else is focused right now. I had like when I was still working in corporate, my boss's father got cancer, and she was just she was just not emotionally available for work. And I was like, well, that is totally fair. I would assume that I wouldn't have to be emotionally available for work if my dad was that sick. But everybody kept like demanding the same of her as they're used to doing, right? And you're like, you guys, you just like, I get it, right? Like my pattern is to expect this of her, and she's not available for that right now. And so it really is that whole concept of stepping into someone else's shoes and saying like, just because I'm ready right now doesn't mean that person's ready right now. And it also doesn't mean I don't love you an equal amount.
Right.
You could still love and respect and cherish and whatever a different person in the relationship you have had to date with that person while you are changing. And you don't know that they're not going to catch up, right? And you don't know that it's not going to work out. But this is the thing about any relationship, is that it's two people. And two people are dealing with completely different. One of the things that I found most interesting actually is that, so last summer, my husband and I were dealing with some grief. Let's call it a grief scenario. And the way I was experiencing the grief and the way he was experiencing the grief was completely different. Same event, right? But we're experiencing it completely differently. And we were not capable of supporting each other in that sense of grief. And the most important thing we did was talk about how we are not capable of supporting each other in that type of grief. So I went and got a grief counselor, which was the best thing for me, right? Like we have not talked about it, which is the best thing for him. And so like we're figuring out how to navigate that. But by me expecting him to just be my grief counselor, that isn't going to solve the problem, because that's actually going to make our relationship worse, instead of us just saying like, hey, I can't support you in this, and I support you in all of these other ways, but maybe I can help you find different support in that arena. And again, it's just one of those things where often we assume that a specific person is supposed to support us a specific way, and sometimes it's just not possible, and actually can be better for the relationship to seek support in that arena from someone else. And I mean, like, I know people who even have like splits in terms of emotional love and sexual love, right? And you're like, that one I haven't figured out, but if that works for you, then that's great, right? Like, as long as it works for both parties, that's fine. But I think a lot of times too, we're just so stuck on, like, I need this person. I need my boss to support me in this. I need my spouse to support me in this. I need my best friend to support me in this. And like, if your best friend doesn't support your new business endeavor, does that mean she can't be your best friend? Maybe not, right? Like, and again, that's an exploration. Does that have to mean that? Can she not support it? Maybe she is feeling stuck and wishes she could do that, but she's really jealous and she doesn't want it rubbed in her face all the time that you have the support system to do that, and she doesn't, right? Like, we just never know. And so there's just so much to explore.
Most definitely. Yeah, really, really good points. And I think even just on that last point is, I think a lot of this comes down to expectations, right? So we have expectations on ourselves and we place expectations on others, but have we agreed in the relationship that these expectations will be met? Right. So, like you said with your example from last year, is that the fact that, it's two things. What are the expectations and how are they communicated? Are they communicated? Because if I don't tell you that during this phase of whatever it is that I'm going through in my life, because I haven't communicated that to you in the first place, you don't actually know what I'm dealing with. So if I don't communicate to you either what I'm dealing with or the space that I need right now or the support that I need right now or the fact that I'm going to an external place to get that support because that's what's best for me, we haven't agreed that the conditions for which our relationship exists on have changed. So exactly what you said is that case of people will still expect the same thing from you. And you're like, I can't give it, but they don't know why, because you haven't said. And so, I mean, even just kind of thinking about that, I want to, maybe even jump to the next question, is because where we talk about expectations and being in a place where you are different, you feel different, you are operating differently, your trajectory of your life is changing, and you're starting to see the value of, redefining your boundaries, because maybe in the relationships that you've had, you've not valued yourself enough to set the right kind of boundaries. So now you're in a position to say, right, I know who I am. I know that I'm worthy. I don't have to be, catering to every single person's need, especially when I don't want to. So let me redefine those boundaries. So the question around that is, how do I then go about redefining boundaries with people that I know won't respect them?
So when I read this question, I was like, ooh, because the first thing I need to challenge everybody, I was like, how do you know they won't respect them? Right? Because especially if you've never tried to initiate boundaries before, you don't know that they're not going to accept them. And this is like one of the biggest challenges in relationships, is that we assume and therefore we don't act. So we don't actually know. Like, we might show up and set boundaries and people might be awesome at maintaining our boundaries. And it's funny, actually, same show I was watching yesterday, one of the guys was this gentleman and his grandfather. He was taking care of his grandfather, and it was just like way too much for him to handle. And he was going to have to tell him he needed to go back to the seniors facility. And he was like, but he'll think I don't love him. And one of the other characters was like, really? But we all think these things, right? Like I can't do that. I can't just go get a counselor. And like, quite honestly, to deal with my grief, I got a life coach and a counselor. This is my path, right? But it's like, that's, you don't know. Like, my husband is super excited that he can support me in that way, right? So like, when I have grief counselor meeting days, he clears his day and he makes sure that he can take care of our son. That's what he can do for me in my grief journey. That does not mean he has to be my grief counselor, right? So, and one of the reason why I keep bringing up this example too, it's just such a great example, because when we met each other, when we got into our marital contract and all those things, neither of us had experienced grief. So it couldn't have possibly been an expectation that we had set in the relationship, because we didn't know how either of us were going to deal with that. And then once we did, you have to navigate that, right? You have to explore, you have to navigate. Like at the beginning, I didn't even know what was the best way for me to navigate that, right? Like I was completely lost, completely new experience. And I was just like, I don't even know. And we had to talk about it. And I had to try some things. That didn't work. I did like group sessions, like group chat sessions, and that didn't really work for me, right? And so I had to explore what was going to work. And at the end of the day, we were invested in the relationship, and we needed to adjust the relationship to make it work in this scenario. Lots of other parts of the relationship were fine and continued to be fine, and we didn't have to address all the parts of our relationship. And this is the other thing when we talk about toxic relationships, is that maybe the entire relationship isn't toxic. Maybe something is just like leaching poison from one specific thing. And if we address that one specific thing, the rest of the relationship can be highly productive. Or maybe we take away that one expectation and say like, oh, I kind of unfairly put that expectation in this relationship. But if I took that expectation, I put it over here in this relationship, because it doesn't mean you don't need it, right? Like you need it. You just can't get it from that person, right? So what if I took that and I put it over here in this relationship where I can get it? Oh, now I'm getting that. This relationship with this person now has that expectation removed, and everything is awesome, right? So one, don't assume that people aren't going to expect your boundaries, because in my experience, like 90% of the time they do. They just are not used to you setting boundaries. And so it might take them a little getting used to, but they'll respect the boundaries. And then for those 10% of people who don't, maybe you can take that expectation and just put it elsewhere. But don't deprive yourself. I want to make that clear. Like if it's something you need out of a relationship in your life, don't say, I don't need that. You do need that. You just might not need it from that person. You might be able to get it in a coaching relationship, in a business partner relationship, at work, right? Like there's so many relationships at work have a long way to go, because the whole coworker thing, that's not a relationship, right? We don't build relationships with our coworkers right now. And there's nothing saying we can't build a relationship from our coworkers besides our internal belief that we can't build relationships with our coworkers because I'm not going to live here for forever, or I'm not going to work here for forever, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, again, we all have many stories in our heads that convince us not to do things. And so if the story in your head is I can't set boundaries because this person won't appreciate my boundaries, one, you don't know that's true. Two, if that boundary is important enough to you, it's still important to set the boundary. And if that person can't honor your boundaries, then perhaps it is the time for that person to have a different type of relationship with you. You don't have to completely cut people off, blah, 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 but it's just a different type of relationship. And that's also fine, right? We have a lot of guilt of humans as an organism constantly evolve, right? But for some reason we say like our relationships are going to stay exactly the same our entire lives. But like if two people are in a relationship and two people are constantly evolving, there is no possible way that relationship is going to stay the same, right? It's just not a thing. People are dealing with grief when they never have before. People are dealing with, like, my grandparents are getting to the point where they have to go into long-term care. And my mom is dealing with that from, like, that's her parents' perspective, right? Like, everybody is experiencing all of these things. And it's not for you to understand all of the things that they are experiencing. It's just for you to appreciate that what they're experiencing impacts their relationship with you. And that doesn't mean they don't love you. That doesn't mean that they don't appreciate you. It doesn't mean they don't respect your boundaries, right? And the actions only mean what we make them mean. So can we make them mean that something that gives another person just a little bit more space to be an imperfect human than a little bit less space to be an imperfect human?
Yeah, definitely. And there's a few things that you mentioned that I think are really valid, especially this whole you know, there's something that I like to kind of refer to as access, right? Because I think there's like this kind of like finite perspective. So if I'm changing and someone doesn't want to change with me, it's over, right? There's a very cut and dry kind of approach to it, which is not necessarily accurate because, like you say, is let's evaluate what is it? Is it the entire relationship that I need to change? Right? Or is it one aspect of it? And if that aspect of it doesn't change, but everything else is fine, do I really need to have that from them? Can I get that from someone else? So I think that's a really relevant point. And then also it's kind of like, well, if they are actually not willing, right? I think, you know, that there's kind of like 2 points. One is the compassion, right? So we need to have more compassion for our friends. They're our friends and our colleagues and whatever for a reason. We have to trust that we are now to a degree enforcing a change in their life that they hadn't anticipated. So if we offer some compassion to them in the sense that I'm changing the boundaries of this relationship, and like you said, I'm giving you that compassionate time, compassionate leave maybe, to deal with, to a degree, loss, right? Because the 5 stages of grief are the same as the 5 stages of change. So you've changed something, and I need to get used to that. I need to go through that phase of denial and anger and all of that and get to the point where I can be in acceptance of this and now start to see the possibilities of what our friendship can look like. So I need to be more compassionate. And on the other side of that is if I have come to you and I've said, you know, Tracy, I'm just going through these things at the moment and this is what I really need from you, and you're unwilling to actually adapt to that, then that's different. And I think that again, it comes back to the question of, well, how much of the relationship is changing? If
Mhm.
there's this thing that you won't accept, am I okay with that? And if I am not, then I can reduce my access, right? I feel like it's like a, you know, like a bullseye on a dartboard, right? So in the center, there's you, and you've got all of these rings around you, and your close circle are, you know, close to those that center ring. But when you get to experience those relationships where people are unwilling to adapt to that version of you that's evolving, that's changing, and might need different things, and not willing to agree to the expectations you set, you put them on outer rings. And it's not that you have to get rid of them in their entirety unless the whole relationship is you've got to, you know, throw that in the trash, right? But if they are still on some level good to you in some way, or you work well in some way, but the things that are most important to you can't be met, you just move them into the outer rings. And so therefore you reduce the access, because what you don't want to do is be in a position where, you know, maybe you're triggered by it. And so because you spend so much time with them, you're always triggered. And always being triggered is not allowing you to have conducive, positive, healthy relationships with anyone else, because you're constantly thinking that they're going to do the same thing to you that the other one has done. So I think there's like an element of trying to manage how much access you give to people, especially if you know that they might drain you or they might not want to meet the expectations that you've set.
Mhm. Well, and it's so interesting. Let me share a story about my experience with my mom. Because for years, my story to myself was my mom was just negative, right? And all she ever did was say something negative about whatever was happening. And like this was me. I don't want that much negativity in my life. So I put her on the outside rings. But it's my mom, right? And then I like had this such a great relationship with my husband's mom. And I was like, and it's like different when it's your own mom because she raised you and all of these things. You have a much longer past story, right? But I was just it that I wasn't happy with that. So that didn't work for me. It didn't work for me to put her out there. So it was really interesting once because I was talking to a coach of mine at one point and I was telling him about my mom. And he said to me, "What do you think I know about your mom right now?" And I was like, I had used the phrase a hard nut to crack. And so I was like, that she's a hard nut to crack. and you don't even know her, right? Like, so if he went and had coffee with her, he might have a perfectly lovely conversation. But my filter was that she's a hard nut to crack, and I can't have a not negative conversation with her. And that weekend, my mom was coming to town, and I was like, okay, so the only thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go for coffee, and I'm just not going to think the thought she's saying something negative. I'm just not going to. I'm just going to focus the whole time on just listening to her, listening with compassion and all these things, and not thinking that she was talking about something negative. And we had coffee for like an hour and a half, and I didn't hear her say one negative thing. Now, have I heard her say negative things again since? Yes, of course I have. But what that said to me was that, like, wow, how much of this is her and how much of that is my filter? Is that we were talking about the red car scenario, right? Like, once you're looking for a red car, then all you see is red cars. Until then, you just like see all of the color of cars. And there was the same thing with my mom, because I was specifically looking for something negative. I found it every single time. And when I was specifically not looking for something negative, I also found that. And so sometimes when we have these people who have that kind of the energy that doesn't light us up, there's more to explore for you too, right? If someone you always, I was working actually one time in my work environment. I'll use another work environment example too. Now, there was so I was sales and marketing, always on the creative side, and I just could not get along with the director of development. Just the two of us we always had completely opposite ideas of how to do things, and like we were just complete opposites. And I did the same thing. I was like, okay, so I'm going to schedule a meeting with just him, and I'm just going to listen to what he has to say. I'm not going to try and be competitive. I'm not going to try and beat him. I'm not going to be smarter. I'm not going to do any of those things. I'm just going to listen to what he has to say. And that meeting changed our entire working relationship. Like, I actually heard him say legitimately smart things that I can't think of because I don't have that perspective. And so when I came at it from a competitive, like him and I with our CEO, we were just like very competitive. It was like we were trying to run a race and see who would be fastest. And once we had that conversation, we could work together. Everything was like much smoother in terms of like teams working with teams, and like just everything was way better. And that was because I checked my ego. Right. So sometimes when we experience these things as triggers, I'm a parent too. I have a 4-year-old, and like people are always like, oh, they're just pushing my buttons. Right? No, they're not. You should explore what your buttons are. Like, why does what they're doing trigger you so much? Do you think you need to win? Do you think you should be ashamed? Do you think, and like, it's just explore those things, because every time you get triggered, it gives you the opportunity to look at, what is it? What are the thoughts I'm thinking? What is it? What is my story I've created for myself around this scenario, or around this type of feeling, this type of emotion that makes me feel triggered? Because sometimes if we don't look at the triggering, we don't look at ourselves on the triggering front, then we're just going to be like constantly pushing people to the outside rings of our circle. And then we don't have anybody left on the inside. And that's because we've created this, like, you know, like when magnets repel against each other, you've put like your outside magnets just pushing everybody away because you won't do the work to look at, well, maybe, again, how am I playing into the toxicity here? And do I have to, right? Is there a way for me to not play that role? Yeah, because at the end of the day, we can't have a relationship with another person without looking at ourselves. We're contributing to that, right? And if we want to be, I'm not a big fan of doing like 50% contributions, because again, like sometimes I'm pulling you and sometimes you're pulling me, and that's how a relationship works. But at the same time, it's just like we need to look at our contribution. And if we're not willing to look at our contribution, then how fair is it to put all of the blame onto other people?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, like you say, it all comes back down to essentially accountability or self-awareness. It's, you know, the situation is happening. how am I contributing to it, whether it's positive or negative, and am I choosing to see the negative or positive? And that's interesting because I remember years ago, I had when I was in a kind of fixed term kind of contract, and I joined a training team. And it's funny you talk about the competitive nature. I'm actually not competitive in work, but I think people see me as competitive, which is quite interesting but I'm just because I'm passionate about learning. So I'm very open to like, do you want me to do that? Yep, I'll do that. Because for me, it's learning. Whereas they're like, oh, you know, you're trying to get in good with this person or that person. So it's just been interesting in that perspective. And I remember I'd kind of formed a relationship with one lady who, after some time, I'd kind of realized that she was probably being bullied in the workplace, kind of very subtly, because there is a group of people who had a structure that they'd had in place. And the problem was, her and I were people who actually really enjoy learning. So we want to be a part of everything. And we're like, well, how can we improve this process? And how can we do this? How can we give more? And they're like, my friend, I'm doing enough. Please.
Just slow.
Right? Slow down. So we got to this point, interestingly, where I then become the target of the bullies. But what was interesting, even more interesting in the fact that they redirected, is that the person who I kind of not protected, but I stood up for plenty of times when needed, actually turned on me because it meant that she was no longer the target. So that was very interesting. And so when you talk about things like expectations, I had to withdraw from that, because I've said, well, I can actually no longer trust you simply because I was there for you. And this isn't about you having to be there for me, but it's just not contributing to the madness that's going on, because these people were clearly bullies and we knew that. But the fact that you changed sides so that you can either have yourself, you know, presented in a different way, or, you know, I don't know what it was. And to be fair, I didn't really care that much. But I actually, thinking about what you said today, I actually went through that method of communication to say, this doesn't work for me, because I've only been there for you. I've only stood up for you, whether you've actually known it or not, because I have had conversations about what's going on without your knowledge, because I just don't think it's right. And this isn't for me to say, you know, this isn't for me to say that this is what you have to do, or I'm not telling you because I need anything in return, but I just need you to understand that I've also put myself in the firing line, and you don't owe me anything. But one thing I didn't expect is for you to turn the gun on me. Right. And so I can't be a part of that. So I'm stepping back. And she was really upset about it. And I just thought, well, kind of not my problem, because now I have to deal with 3 bullies. Right. And that is
well,
is
I was
too
going to
much.
say, she probably has like way more internal reflection she needs to do about what's going on there. If she flips sides, but that she's also upset that you are mad at her. It's just like, there's a
It's a
lot
lot
of
to deal with, right? So
but this is another thing we don't know, right? Like you don't know her entire past, how long in her life she's been bullied. Maybe that's the only way she knows, is like you're either a bullyee or a bullier, right? And so then she feels like she flops sides, and like there's only those 2 options, right? These are the things we don't know about other people, and none of those. So this is the most important thing that I want to celebrate from the story that you're telling, Anthea, is that that's not you, right? Like she's got her own issues, clearly, right? And she doesn't know how to deal with a lot of what's going on right now. And I do. And so I don't need that. That's something that's like Anthea 0.2 instead of the Anthea 3.0 that I am now. And it's just like, I can't go that far backwards to have a relationship with a person. And that's okay, right? That's we need to give ourselves permission to be in different spaces than other people, and to give ourselves this celebrate ourselves, and being able to say, you know what, I have a lot more like self-awareness than this group of people, and high five me, and I'll go over here and do my own thing, and they can have their problems with it if they want. But I had a similar experience in work too, with people were just always like, how come you get all the opportunities and blah, 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 blah. And I was like, I just show up and I do good work, and then people just give me opportunities. I don't know, like that's just how it worked out for me. But like people were mad at me and didn't like me because of that. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to trade my opportunities because you're mad, right? Like, look at you. What are you doing? How could you contribute more? How could you like go ask for opportunities? I was constantly bored. So I was always like, can I have something more to do? And people gave me fun stuff to do. So like that just turned out being nifty, but you don't want to know, what are we going to do about it? I think this is one of the things that we can really take away from this session today. Like, what are you going to do? What are you going to do about it? And if you're not willing to do anything, like I said, then like it's a relationship. We don't put 100% of the must-dos on another party in a relationship.
Most definitely. And this also kind of leads into one of the other questions, actually, is because, thinking about even just the work situations that we've spoken about, there's people who've had challenges in personal relationships, in sibling relationships, family relationships, etc. So when you have that point where maybe you felt betrayed, right? So, and I have a feeling I kind of know where you're going to go with this, just because of what you said before, but I'm going to ask anyway, because I know we project, we don't know what people are going to say, but from an internal emotional perspective, if I have, because I know that even in that work situation, that kind of changed how I approached how, close I got to certain people initially, because I was like, you know what, that was literally the most awful working experience I've had. I don't want that to be repeated. And so when you're coming out of these relationships and you're thinking about potentially meeting new people, because obviously one of the things that we talk about is building communities, building networks, meeting people, turning strangers into friends, turning strangers into, people that you can collaborate with. But if you've been betrayed in the past, then it's kind of like, well, how can you know, how, whether or not the people that you are now going to be vulnerable with and maybe share some of your dreams and aspirations with, that they're not going to potentially betray you as well?
You don't.
Why did I know that was coming? I thought, you know what? You could even let me.
It's so funny. You sent all these questions in advance, and I'm like, I have like 3-word answers for all of these, but we talked about them for a long time.
I knew that was coming.
You just don't know, right? And the thing, we talked about fear a little bit earlier on in the show, right? Like, if you're constantly afraid that someone's going to betray you, you're going to lose out on a ton of opportunities to build amazing relationships with amazing people. And so, is it unfortunate? Yes, but we're all human, right? Like, I don't like to say the get hit by the bus thing, right? But like, you don't know that your favorite person in the world isn't going to get hit by a bus tomorrow, and then you don't have that relationship anymore, right? Like, you don't know that. You could have put all of your trust in them, and now you're back to zero, right? So what does that feel like to go through the rest of my life not giving that trust or giving that love or giving whatever it was to somebody else, right? Like, just to hold on to that fear and not have that. And every time you put trust or vulnerability or dreams and aspirations out into the world, you have the opportunity for someone to let you down. You do. But the more you put that out into the world, the more you also attract the type of people who are also putting that out into the world. So people, if you show up and put out love into the world, you attract people who put out love into the world. So the likelihood that they will show up and betray you is low. But if you aren't sharing anything and what you're putting out to the world is really nothing, but really what that is fear, right? I'm putting fear out into the world. Fear is going to come back. And the likelihood of you being surrounded by people who are also fearful, who are a lot more likely to just disappear and up and then like is higher. And so everything in relationships is risky, right? I'm just going to tell you guys, the show I keep referencing is Bones. I don't know if you guys have seen the show, but it's like my favorite show. And now I'm just thinking of like all of these different things. And at one point, so the main character is a forensic anthropologist who has like tried very hard for most of her life to not have relationships, like emotional attachments to other humans. And at one point, she says to one of the characters who had lost his sister, is it worth it? Is it worth investing so much of yourself in another person's happiness? And the answer to the question is like, if I wasn't willing to risk my life, if I was willing to risk, I can't talk. If I was willing to risk my life for her, then why would I not be willing to risk my happiness? And it's just something that speaks really strongly to me, because that's the bet. That's the bet you make with every relationship, right? And some relationships, it doesn't work out. It doesn't, the gamble is not good, right? I put a lot of money and time and effort into a 10-year relationship that ended in a divorce, right? Like, and that, do I regret the 10-year investment? No, I don't, because it made me who I was today. Am I still worth that person? No, because that is not what is right for me anymore. And it doesn't mean that the gamble isn't worth it. I just like, I'm one of those types of people that would, it's like, I would have rather loved and lost than never to have loved at all. Like that classic one.
Titanic playback.
Right. And it's, the thing is that when there's so much goodness that comes from that trust and that vulnerability. And almost all of us have been betrayed in a relationship of some kind. Now, some of us to more substantial degrees, absolutely. But I have never seen the right answer for a person to be to just not trust anybody again. And if you are, here's the thing about the right people as well, right? Your peeps. People will actually be your peeps, is that they might see you and see that you're hesitant, right? Like you're hesitant to show up and share. I'm actually in a coaching program right now where one of the participants is just like, she will tell the minimum viable amount of information the coach requires her to tell in front of the group. And that is where she's at. She's there because of a specific reason, probably because she's been in a lot of other environments like that have caused her to believe that trust doesn't exist here. I am coming from a different space where I have been in spaces like that where there is a lot of trust. And so I influence the space in a specific way. I don't force her to be any way that she's not. I accept her and love her and appreciate her for exactly where she is in her fearful, grief-stricken state. And I'm not here to try and force you to tell the story you don't want to tell. I'm here for you to support you where you're at today. And that kind of goes back to the whole point about like, I don't get to control where someone else is at. And if I'm in a relationship with a person and I'm doing a bunch of changing, you know how much changing that person is doing just to be in a relationship with the changed version of you? That doesn't even mean that they're changing, right? Like, or they have to be at the exact same part of the path you're on, right? Like they've changed a lot because you've changed a lot. And so there's just like all of this interconnectedness that we don't get to control, and only we can control what we're going to do. So I don't know. At the end of the day, I would just say, like, is fear controlling your decisions? Or is achievement, love, happiness, friendship, community, right? Like fill in the gap with your word of choice on the opposite end of toxic relationship. But is it that? Is it happiness and joy, or is it fear? And if it's fear, that's something you have to look within. And so, like, yes, there's probably actions people are taking that trigger your fear. That's where you can start to, I like to call them windows, windows into your personal brand. What is making me afraid, right? But at the end of the day, it's me making me afraid. Maybe it's a story about myself. Maybe it's a past experience that I keep reliving. Maybe it's a fear of a potential future, which we don't even know is going to happen, right? Like, you don't know, but it's your opportunity, your window to explore. And so at the end of the day, Ask yourself. Like, this is my number one takeaway from you guys today. When you feel, because toxic is a feeling, right? There's something that we feel that we're like, oh, I don't want that. Like, when you have that toxic feeling, just ask yourself, is there any fear here? And if there is, explore that a little bit further. Maybe it's just something you don't need to be afraid of anymore.
Yeah, love that. Love that as a takeaway as well. Because I think, part of it is the sense that I think I alluded to this earlier, is that everything is so black and white, right? It's you support me or you don't, you change or you don't, you accept my terms or you don't. And I think what we've explored today is that none of those things are true. It's about communication, it's about compassion, it's about opening the dialogue to explain to other people what point, I think something you mentioned, what point of the path that you're on, so that they can understand what that looks like, and they have the time, and you've also given them the respect and space to adapt to the newer version of you. And it's not necessarily that they are intentionally toxic, because sometimes people actually can be toxic as a result of being on the receiving end of toxicity by others. So it's not always something that's intentional. But I think, based on what you're saying, it's really about self-awareness again. Is how am I contributing to these feelings that I feel? If this is the situation, what am I doing that is making it so, or what can I do to change that? So yeah, really, really appreciate you spending time with us today and kind of going through, some of these thoughts. A lot of things to really reflect on here, because yeah, it does change a lot in terms of, you don't have to actually get rid of anybody. You can just redefine and have the communication to say, who can you be to me? And if that's not enough of what I need, then where else can I get that from in order to kind of maintain these relationships? So yeah, love that. Absolutely love that. So before we wrap up, please let us know, what are you up to? Where can people find you? If people want to learn more about your business, peeps, building communities, moving past a toxic relationship, how can they find you?
Yes, thank you. So I'm mostly on LinkedIn. You guys can find me on LinkedIn. There it is. I think Facebook and Instagram. Anyway, Tracy Borreson. You can see my name. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm mostly there. I do a lot of live conversations like this, just to try and get conversations started. Right? We talked about this right at the beginning, but the personal development, exploring relationships, right? None of this happens just with one person. It happens through conversation. It happens through listening. It happens through your sharing of your perspective, learning new perspectives, incorporating that, trying things on, taking things off, right? Like we as individuals are such complex humans, and it's important to explore the complexity without putting too much focus on, like, this is just who I am, right? Like, this is just I am, or like that person, they're just toxic, right? Like you said, you don't know what is creating that vibe for that person. They might have the worst home life. They might be dealing with a sick parent. They might be dealing with getting evacuated from their home. They might be dealing with a whole bunch of things that they don't want to tell you, because their story is that that's inappropriate to share with so-and-so, because you're supposed to protect them from pain and all of these things. There's a million different societal narratives that people are using every day that create toxicity, but not on purpose. And I'm with you on that, Anthea, because I don't believe, I don't know, there's maybe a handful of humans on the planet that show up to be toxic on purpose, but most people aren't doing that on purpose. And so being able to have conversations, being able to be supportive of them where they're at, and like, they can't be anywhere they're not. Right? They can't be where you are. You have a gift. You have a gift of being where you're at. Not everyone has that gift. So how can we keep that in mind while still building our relationships? And I'm here to talk about it. I believe we grow through conversation. So come connect with me. I would love to have a one-on-one conversation and talk about these types of things so you can get more peeps in your life and less toxic relationships.
Love that. Love that. Absolutely love that. Definitely go and follow Tracy on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, wherever. Always having conversations that challenge, the perceptions that we generally have, and help us to be better versions of ourselves. So really appreciate, you coming to spend some time with us today, dropping some gems, some useful information. And so for those of you who've joined, thank you for the comments. Thank you for being around with us. We're the SHiFT is this is one aspect of it. It's covering all parts. We're over halfway through now, so we've got physical health or well-being, and also finances to come, and we'll also be having, so those are on the Saturdays, and then the next 2 Wednesdays we'll be having a Q&A with an industry expert to kind of share some additional tips and help you kind of navigate on a daily basis. But I think, exactly like you said, Tracy, it's all about conversation. That's why I love doing these types of sessions, because the more you can see human beings converse, and even especially when there's differences of opinion, but there is absolutely no respect lost, right? There is no, everyone can be right. And it's just appreciating and celebrating those perspectives and seeing how they can add to our own lives. That's where we make shifts. That's how our life changes. That's how we progress. And most importantly, that's how we help others, because that's what we're really here to do. We go through a lot of this pain and suffering so that we can actually help people, not experience it on that level. So do remember to sign up to the SHiFT. We still have 2 weeks left, so join in on those. We'll be back next Wednesday, so make sure you're subscribed to the page on Facebook or YouTube channel or on Twitter, and you'll get notifications when the new things come up. So yeah, we again, big thank you. So just before we finally go, any last final words that you want to offer before we shoot?
Permission to do you. That's what I always tell people. Every single person, every single relationship you have is unique. Your relationships are different than mine. They're different than Anthea's. So this is the power of conversation. Take what you heard, try it on for yourself, do what feels right for you in your relationships. And there is no one right answer. You know the answer. It's in you. It's in you somewhere. And this is things like the SHiFT will help you to connect with your ability to answer those questions. So permission to do you.
Love it. Okay, so thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you again soon. Take care.
Thanks, Anthea.